Chinese President Xi Jinping delivered a new global security proposal on April 2021. It questioned global alliances while calling out Cold War mentality, hegemonies, and power politics as issues that would endanger world peace and exacerbate security challenges in the 21st century, according to the Asian Pacific Diplomat. Now, this against the backdrop of the month-long conflict now underway in Ukraine. Africa has since found itself embroiled in diplomatic tensions and the aftermath of the conflict. Joining us now to explain Africa's position in the proposed new global order is Gideon Chitanga, a research associate at the Africa Center for the Study of the United States at the University of Witwatersrand. Gideon, good to have you with us again tonight here on In Focus. So, Xi Jinping, in his address, he says we must now begin to take seriously this question that threatens world peace and seriously place humanity at the center of how we approach the development of peace in the world. What inspires these comments, and what does he really mean by it?
I think that this is an important perspective that is being offered by the Chinese government, and it tallies very well with their worldview and their perspective towards development. That critical players in the world, the big powers as well as small powers, have to play a role that promotes that fundamentally promotes peace. And in doing so, big countries and small countries have to respect each other, respect the sovereignty and self-determination of each other as the basis for cooperative relations that can foster peace as well as development in the global community.
Yeah. In fundamental terms, what does the Global Security Initiative imagine as a concept of security? What does it say the world needs? So what does a country like South Africa or even the continent like Africa need when it comes to the concept of security?
So as a concept of security, it is centered more on dialogue, more on engagement and talking to each other in addressing critical issues that affect different countries. In contrast to hegemonic historical politics that we have witnessed since the end of the Cold War, where countries were divided along ideological lines, and they tended to gang up on each other as different camps of alliances who leveraged their power on the basis of force instead of dialogue. There is something that you mentioned earlier about a human-centered approach. A human-centered approach basically puts the worthiness of human beings first and understands human beings in a universal way beyond one section of our community or one section of our human beings, one section of a society. President Xi further goes on to say that a threat to one section of humanity is a threat to the whole humanity. And he further asserts that there are no winners when there is conflict, because conflict eventually destroys everybody. So the key pillar of this idea of the new security initiative is the idea of respecting our humanness, our shared humanness, and respecting that shared humanness in the sense that our interests can be negotiated and on the basis of principles of respecting each other, countries respecting each other, generating more dialogue to unlock those critical questions that threaten humanity in a way that fosters more progress.
Yeah. What are the practical implications then of that common security? Especially, we are addressing that on the backdrop of the international conflict that is currently going on between Russia and Ukraine, United States, NATO, and those aligned to NATO coming on board. Practically, what does that mean then for all these bodies, and how do they have common security?
Yes, I think one fundamental issue is respecting to the respect to the rule of law and respecting international laws. It's probably I'm oversimplifying it, but essentially it means that each country should respect the other country. That's the first thing. The second thing is conflict is a sociological fact of life, which means including conflict between countries. So, in respect to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, the key players, including the big powers that are also embroiled in trying to find solutions, are better off seeking solutions through dialogue, through mediation, to try and make sure that all the parties have their concerns on the table and their concerns can be addressed through dialogue instead of bloodletting and the destruction that we are witnessing. I think those are the key things.
Yeah. If you speak to, for example, some commentators and experts on both sides, they would tell you sometimes that what Putin is trying to establish with this invasion or military action that he's carrying out in the Ukraine, depending on which word you use, is trying to establish a balance in the world, in the globe. Whether or not the approach is effective and sustainable is the question. What is your view?
I think that my reading of the conflict is that Russia is a legitimate interest that it seeks to address. And from the Russian side, we have heard that they see the extension of NATO to their borders as a threat. And the West has concerns which are mutated in their interest with Ukraine. But what is important is to understand that the interest, whether they are the interests of the Russians or the interests of the West and the current government of Ukraine, they do not really have to be overriding. There is room through dialogue for the parties that are concerned in this conflict to find some kind of balance, which is not necessarily a military balance, because a military balance and military alliances have proved to be dangerous, particularly if you consider the history of the past two world wars, both the First World War and the Second World War. Once a military balance or a military alliance, it gets some kind of a distortion and power tilts in a way that the other cannot contain, then the world falls into a slippery slope of conflict. So dialogue, for me, I think it's key, because all issues can be continuously negotiated and you can safely re-establish equilibrium without causing much suffering.
Yeah. Is Russia holding on to the, as they put it here, an outdated mindset of Cold War confrontation? And is this what Xi Jinping is talking against in the global security initiative?
I actually think that if we were to use the idea of a Cold War mentality, it is used here figuratively to reflect that the world should not be ideologically divided. There should be room, if countries respect each other's choices, the sovereignty of different countries to choose their pathways, there should be room to cooperate without dictating that this country has to socially, politically, and economically behave in certain ways. I think both the West, if I were to take this statement figuratively and translate it into action, both the West and the Russian Federation should be able to come to the table and put their concerns on the table without thinking much about the ideological or political systems, but looking at the concerns which render the world a more safer place by negotiating and making compromises.
Yeah. Pursuing unilateralism in the name of multilateralism is another concept which is a little bit complicated for me, saying that this is what the hegemonies of this world are currently pushing in the guise of democracy. Just expand a little bit on that concept.
Yes, I think that's the idea that the West generally refers itself as gangs together as Western democracies, and where their interests are threatened, the West would act in the name of democracy to insulate their action from criticism from outside, acting in the name of protecting democracy, but essentially propagating and advancing their interests. And that becomes unilateral action in the sense that a group of countries who are aligned together, if you like, who are friends, would act together to advance a certain position or protect a certain position, regardless of what other countries or what another country might want to say, whether it's a small country or a big country. And I think what President Xi is referring to here is that idea where we have witnessed what we generally call Western unilateralism, where Western countries come together, gang together to protect certain interests. And these interests may not be favorable with a lot of other countries. I can give you a lot of examples. You would remember that the invasion of Libya, the invasion of Iraq, and a lot of other actions were not really done with the blessing of international law, in the sense that other countries in the United Nations institutions were opposed to that. But once the West determined that democracy was being violated in Libya, they went straight away to invade Libya and then came to retrospectively address the normative concerns and try to use the legalities to justify themselves. So that is what we refer to as unilateralism. And what President Xi is envisaging is a world where countries would be respected and would be consulted because they are sovereign entities. Their worth may not be in their size or subjective value as seen by outsiders, but in their sense of self-determination and sovereignty, and therefore they have a say in the community of world players, and therefore they need to be consulted to give their say on key global issues. And once we get to that level, then we'll be